Sitting down to actually write up the functional behavioral assessment, the FBA in SPED forms. So I'm in here in an eval report for the student. And let's say I'm just starting the new evaluation template. So I want to make sure that the previous evaluation, if there is one, has been finalized and saved, of course, before I do this, because it's going to wipe everything away. But then I'll click New Evaluation Template. And then I could, if I pick one of these EBD templates, it's going to have an FBA in it, because so frequently students who are qualifying under EBD need that FBA. Or I could pick this FBA where it just says that. That's a standalone FBA. So remember, that's outside of a comprehensive evaluation. So, if the student had a comprehensive eval a year and a half ago, they come back from summer break and wow, things are really different, we need to do an FBA, we can do a standalone FBA. So that's what that would be for. For the sake of this video, I'm going to click the EBD template though. Okay, so that has filled itself out. So we would go into the social emotional behavioral section. And there's, starting up here, there's a BASC. We have to scroll a little bit before we're going to see the FBA. There it is. And before we move on, just say that, it's a ASD, student who qualifies under ASD. There's not going to be an FBA template in there by default. So we could press local tests here. And then social emotional behavioral, where is that FBA? FBA. So I could insert, and that FBA template just by itself would be added to our ASD template. So you can always get that FBA template in here. So we obviously want to put your name, title, and date. The data sources. So the parent interview, student interview, teacher interview, the dates of your observations. So we would fill out those details. This is for describing our observations. So student was observed on this date by this person during this class for 50 minutes using, so let's just fill this out, was observed on 11/23/23 at Thanksgiving or close to it. Why did I do that? By John Smith. During chemistry class for 25 minutes. Using an antecedent behavior consequence observation. Okay, and then I would be looking at my either digital if I took these notes, typed them out on my computer, or I'd have a printed version of this with my handwriting on it. But I would look at that and summarize it. So I would say, this is the type of behavior we saw consistently. Before that behavior, we saw peers looking at him, or there were this many kids in the classroom and there was an elevated noise level. Consistently after that behavior, we were seeing this. So summarizing the themes that you're seeing in this, it's not going to be exactly the same thing happening before and after, but generally, like, what is the pattern you're picking up? So summarizing that observation. And then the second observation, again, it might be very similar. You might be using this form again, or maybe another person did that second observation with that ABC form. Maybe when you get to the second or third observation, maybe you did momentary time sampling or one of those other observation methods. So you might end up saying the student was off task 63% of class. That's, this isn't filled out obviously, but that might be your takeaway from doing this momentary time sampling observation. So you would, write up the date, all of that. When you get here, you would say like the purpose of the observation was to document what percentage of time the student is on versus off task. During this observation, the student was on task 63% of the time, off task, of the time, you would add any other details that are relevant. We're not trying to write a novel here, but just what is crucial for the people reading this report to know about the time you spent in that room. So just writing up your 3 observations. Then we have these headings. So student strengths. The way this works is there is some sentence stems here guiding us to pull from the different interviews we have. So instead of writing up huge interviews, like writing up the teacher interview in its entirety, then the student interview in its entirety, the parent interview in its entirety, that would be a lot of writing, and it would be hard for someone reading this to integrate what they were saying together, right? This template helps you integrate what they're saying. So we want to know about the student's strengths. What does the teacher say about their strengths? What does the parent and what does the student say about their strengths, all in one place? So here's an example. You're not meant to use this. It's just like, this is what it would look like potentially when it's fully written out for a student. But to write this out, I'm looking into my interviews. So pretend this is completed. This is like a parent interview. I would be going to, if I use the Google form, I would go to these responses, and the parents' responses would be all written out here. But since it's not filled out, I'm going to just go over here and look at the questions. Same thing with the teacher interview. Again, I would be clicking to responses and seeing all the responses that the potentially multiple teachers wrote out. And then I would have the student interview in all likelihood on paper in front of me on my desk. But you can see student strengths, and then student strengths. So they're all kind of pretty near the top of the interview forms, which makes your job here pretty darn easy, because you're looking, okay, what did those teachers say about their strengths? Write that out. According to the parent, what are their strengths? And then according to the student, what are their strengths? So you're answering those questions, pulling from the interviews. Descriptions of the target behaviors. So let's look at those interviews again. Description of behavior. What problematic behavior do you observe at home? Description of the undesired behavior. So the teachers are checking these boxes. So if multiple teachers, in my responses, I'm gonna have, a chart, which is super handy, of like 2 people picked this, 3 people picked this. And then the student, you're asking them to describe the behavior. So you get it. I think these interviews pretty much mirror the template in SPED forms and make it easier to fill out. So teacher reported that students' emotional behavioral outbursts are the primary behavior of concern. They look like this. And again, you have a full example of what this looks like down here below when it's actually completed for a student. So if you're ever curious, like, am I writing too much? Am I getting to the point of what this is supposed to be? You can look down here at this example. Then setting conditions. So again, that is getting at the lighter fluid here, kind of the sleep, the medication, the dynamics with friends, just the kind of background stuff that overall makes it more likely these behaviors are going to happen. And again, that is in the interviews. Setting events, there's an actual question for parents. So are there specific conditions, events, or activities that make the problem behavior worse, like missed medication, history of academic failure, conflicts at home, lack of sleep? That is in the where is it? Oh, here it was. It was right in front of me. These questions about, like, are there circumstances unrelated to the school setting? So like no medication, illness, physical condition, bus conflict. That's what we're getting at here. And then when it comes to the student, there's the setting events right there. So I'm pulling from those 3 types of interviews I did and answering those questions. And again, there's the sentence stems. Teacher said this, parent said this. You can save yourself a little bit of time by, noting when people said the exact same thing. That happens a lot. And you can say, such and such as parent shared very similar information relative to what his teacher shared, and not have to repeat yourself and write a novel. And again, you've got an example right underneath here of what this looks like when it's fully fleshed out. Antecedent conditions. So that's asking about the match, essentially, like right before. And I'm continuing to just reference these interviews. What situations seem to set off the problem behavior? When is it most likely to occur? Are there specific situations associated with the high likelihood of the undesired behaviors? And then for the student, when is the behavior most likely to happen? So again, familiar here, but sentence stems, and I'm pulling from those 3 interviews to write out what people are seeing. And then there's this full-on example right underneath here. Consequences for the target behavior. Description of consequences. This is the parent interview. What usually happens right after the behavior occurs. Then a few other questions about that. Oh, where are we? Typically, what are the consequences of the student's behavior? And then for the student, description of consequences. So I'm pulling from those 3 parts of my interviews and writing out, again, what overall across teachers, parents, and student, what are they saying about the consequences? And then other. So you have these sections that I haven't talked about quite yet, like the child's interests, how they perceive school, things that motivate them. Those things can fit under here. And those are some of the examples that are written in this guidance text. So I could say, like, teacher reports they're really interested in Pokemon. Parent echoed the same thing. Student mentioned that they're really motivated by earning Pokemon cards. Yeah, just extra information. There's parts in the teacher interview when we're asking about what types of skills the student, like what areas of responsible decision making could the student improve their skills? Like, do they need to work on problem solving? So that information, just other, can go here, and it doesn't need to be a novel. Then we've written up, so far, our 3 observations. And then again, we went through these headings and just pulled primarily from our interviews. But you can also add notes from the observations here. So, if we're writing about the antecedent conditions, again, like the match, it would be worth mentioning, during his observations, we saw this. Like, the teachers are saying this, the parents are saying this, students saying this. We saw it when we were observing him. It's trying to integrate all that together. So we've written all that up, and now we just have this table to fill out. And this is kind of distilling what we've written up here. And you can see there's these very helpful examples. So you don't have to write out a lot. Obviously, these are just templates, so you want to tweak anything that isn't accurate for the student, but there's a lot pre-written here. So target behaviors. Generally, we want to end up with 1 to 3 here. We don't want to end up with a laundry list of 8. We're aiming for the behaviors that are the most disruptive and problematic for the student. So for example, if they are like they play with their pencil, but it doesn't happen very often, and it's not particularly disruptive. And the property destruction and the elopement and the emotional behavioral outbursts are the things that are happening really often and are being really disruptive for the student. You would tend to pick those as the target behaviors. So yeah, like I said, we want to end up with 1 to 3, because these are the things we're going to put in the behavior support plan and really intentionally plan around. So you're removing things. Let's just do that. So just to demonstrate. I would fill that part out, obviously. But yeah, you want to remove the bullets that aren't relevant, aren't the target behaviors you guys are deciding on, and then modify this until it's accurate for the student. Antecedents that increase the target behaviors. So again, we wrote this up narratively right here. So we're not really having to make this up from, we're not making this up from scratch, to be clear. But right up here, I wrote up the interviews and observations and kind of what it all said about what that match is for the behavior. So I'm just going to remove things until I have the antecedents that tend to come before the target behavior that we're talking about, or the target behaviors, plural. And then antecedents that decrease the target behaviors. So there's information in these interviews about that as well. Like, when is it least likely that the student is going to be off task? So maybe they're during their unstructured time, or a new task that's new and exciting, or they're seated near a peer that they really like. But when is it least likely that we're going to see this behavior? And again, we would have written about that up here because it was asked about in our interviews. So this table is just, like I said, distilling and making it really concrete. Then consequences that increase or don't have an effect on the target behavior. So these are things that happen after they are having an outburst, or being off task, or swearing, things that happen after it that make that behavior more likely to occur again, or they don't have an effect at all. So, if we move back away from the student, they're having an emotional behavioral outburst, and the adults back away, or restate the rules, that just amps things up. So that's just an example. So we remove, again, things that aren't relevant. And what we want to end up with is, okay, what after this behavior happens, what types of things coming after it are going to make it just more likely that behavior happens again in the future? And that was written up in our consequences section up here, when we're talking about things that happen after the behavior that make it more likely or less likely to happen again in the future. And we asked about those in our interviews, so we wrote them out up here. And when it comes to this table, we're really just, again, deleting bullets that aren't relevant for the most part. And then consequences that decrease the target behaviors. So things that are coming after that behavior that do tend to make it less likely it's going to happen in the future. So if the student is provided with a calming or soothing activity, that makes the emotional behavioral outburst shorter, for example. And then the function of target behaviors. So say that they're different. Let's just say that the function of non-compliance is to avoid a non-preferred activity. And then I would want to unhighlight this. And then the function of inappropriate language is to obtain attention from peers. So this is the main thing you're deciding, is after all of this, like thinking about what happens before these behaviors, what happens after them. Again, we're making a decision about what is the primary function for that behavior, and what is keeping that pattern going, because that is central to the types of strategies we're going to put into that student's behavior plan to try and change and interrupt that pattern of behavior. So that is a decision for the whole team to make, the not one person, but you have different people doing interviews and observations. You guys are working together, coming together and saying, what are the functions of these target behaviors? Do we agree? Because that is the main point of a functional behavioral assessment.